On a quiet autumn night in October 2019, a young mother vanished without a trace. A woman admired for her intelligence, her ambitions, and her devotion to her family disappeared from her home in Columbia, Missouri. What began as a missing persons case soon spiraled into a chilling investigation of deceit, manipulation, disturbing contradictions, and ultimately murder. This is the story of Mengqi Ji, a brilliant engineer, a loving mother, and how her death, buried both physically and metaphorically, finally came to light after months of suspicion, scientific breakthroughs, and a community searching for justice. Joseph Mengqi Ji. Born in China, Mengqi Ji was an extraordinary young woman. She moved to the United States to pursue higher education, earning her master's degree in mechanical and aerospace engineering at the University of Missouri in December 2014. After finishing her studies, she began working professionally in the dental products industry. It was there, at a company called Nanova Dental, that she met Joseph Elledge, a relationship that would later become the center of a devastating criminal case. Mengqi wasn't just remembered for her academic accomplishments. She was known as a devoted mother to her young daughter, born in October 2018, and as someone who worked hard to balance career, family, and life in a place far from home. To her family back in China, she was a daughter and a sister, someone who had built a life that blended dreams with reality. But behind the scenes, things were not always as they seemed. Tia Jina Ingo Lifa and Mes Suyurai. Their relationship began in 2015 when Elledge was a young employee and Mengqi was his supervisor. They started dating shortly afterward and planned a future together that included marriage and children. In September 2017, they married in a ceremony attended by friends and family. The couple even traveled to China so that Joseph could ask Mengqi's parents for her hand in marriage, a symbolic and meaningful show of respect for her culture and heritage. Despite how it appeared from the outside, the marriage was far from peaceful. In the years that followed, the relationship became strained. According to court reports and evidence later presented at trial, arguments, emotional distance, and escalating tensions marked the couple's time together. In the months before Mengqi's disappearance, there were reports of disagreements between them over parenting, communication, cultural differences, and accusations that would later become central to the murder investigation. Osito BR 8 2019 TSNEHT. On the night of October 8, 2019, the home Joseph Elledge shared with his wife, Mengqi Ji, appeared ordinary from the outside. Just days earlier, the couple had celebrated their daughter's first birthday, a milestone that, for most families, marks joy, reflection, and hope for the future. But inside that house in Columbia, Missouri, the atmosphere was far from peaceful. According to Elledge, that evening ended in a heated disagreement between husband and wife, one that would later become the centerpiece of his defense in court, and one of the most scrutinized moments of the entire case. At one of events, Mengqi allegedly pushed him during the dispute, and he responded by pushing her back. Elledge insisted that this single push was not meant to harm her, but rather to create distance during the confrontation. He claimed that Mengqi lost her balance and fell, striking her head against the kitchen counter. According to his testimony, this fall was accidental, a tragic, unintended consequence of a moment of anger. Elledge told the court that after the fall, Mengqi appeared conscious at first and later went to bed. He claimed that there were no immediate signs of severe injury, no dramatic bleeding, no clear indication that her life was in danger. But when he woke up the next morning, he said everything had changed. Elledge testified that he found Mengqi unresponsive in their bed. Panic, he claimed, took over. Faced with the realization that his wife was dead, he said fear clouded his judgment and drove him to make what he would later describe as unbelievably dumb decisions. Rather than calling emergency services, the single action that might have clarified whether Mengqi was truly beyond help, Elledge chose silence. He did not call 911. He did not alert neighbors. He did not seek medical assistance. Instead, according to his own statements to investigators, he wrapped Mengqi's body, carried it to his car, and placed her in the trunk. Most disturbing of all, he said he did this while their one-year-old daughter was still alive and present, placing the child in the back seat before driving away from the house. Elledge told investigators that he drove to a secluded area in Rockbridge Memorial State Park, an isolated natural landscape outside Columbia. There, under the cover of darkness, he buried his wife's body. This act, not impulsive, but deliberate, required time, physical effort, and multiple conscious decisions. It was not a single panic moment, but a series of actions carried out over hours. Afterward, he returned home and resumed life as though Mengqi had simply disappeared. To investigators, this narrative raised immediate and serious concerns. While accidental injuries do happen, the circumstances surrounding Elledge's account were riddled with contradictions and omissions. Detectives questioned why a loving spouse would choose concealment over help, especially when emergency services could have intervened. They questioned why a mother's death would be followed by burial, rather than desperate attempts at resuscitation. And they questioned why Elledge later reported Mengqi missing, suggesting she had voluntarily left, instead of acknowledging the events he now claimed had occurred. Investigators also found it deeply troubling that Elledge's story evolved over time. Key details were missing from his initial statements and only emerged later, once evidence began closing in around him. The absence of urgency, the calculated steps taken to hide her body, and the willingness to involve their infant daughter in the aftermath all pointed to something far darker than a simple accident. While Elledge framed his actions as panic-driven, authorities saw a pattern of deception, one that suggested not just fear, but consciousness of guilt. From the very beginning, law enforcement believed something was profoundly wrong. The story Elledge told did not align with Mengqi Ji's character, her devotion to her child, or the physical and behavioral evidence uncovered during the investigation. What he described as an accident soon became, in the eyes of detectives and later a jury, a carefully constructed narrative meant to mask the truth. And as the case unfolded, it became clear that the night of October 8, 2019, was not just the end of a marriage, it was the beginning of a long and painful search for justice. Mengqi Ji. Rather than contacting authorities immediately after discovering that his wife was dead, Joseph Elledge chose to wait. Those hours, stretching into days, would later become one of the most damaging aspects of his story. It was not until October 10, 2019, nearly 2 days after Mengqi Ji was last seen, that he finally contacted the Columbia Police Department to report her missing. When Elledge made that call, he did not say his wife was injured, unresponsive, or in danger. He told police that Mengqi had left the house around 11:30 p.m., the night before and never returned. He portrayed her disappearance as voluntary, suggesting she had walked out without warning. According to his statement, he believed Mengqi may have returned to China to be with another man, someone he claimed she had been communicating with online. This narrative immediately shaped the direction he hoped the investigation would take, not a crime, but a runaway spouse. To detectives, this explanation raised more questions than answers. Officers are trained to look for patterns in missing persons cases, and Mengqi Ji's alleged disappearance did not follow any recognizable pattern of a planned departure. There was no argument reported to police at the time of the missing report, no note, no messages sent to friends or family suggesting she intended to leave. And most detectives, this was the detail that shattered any possibility of a voluntary disappearance. Mengqi Ji was a devoted mother. Friends, co-workers, and family members consistently described her as attentive, loving, and deeply bonded to her child. The idea that she would leave the country, or it was no longer difficult to imagine that a heated argument with his wife could have turned violent. The notion that Mengqi's death was a freak accident began to feel increasingly implausible. As suspicion intensified, police moved decisively. Investigators obtained and executed a search warrant for the couple's home. This was no longer a routine missing persons inquiry. It was becoming a full-scale criminal investigation. Officers meticulously documented the residence, collecting items that might later explain where Mengqi had gone or what had happened to her. Among the items seized were muddy boots belonging to Joseph Elledge. At first glance, they may have seemed unremarkable, but detectives are trained to think beyond the obvious. The presence of mud suggested recent outdoor activity, possibly in a wooded or remote area, an odd detail for a man claiming his wife had simply walked out of the house and vanished. The boots were carefully collected, logged into evidence, and sent for forensic analysis. At the time, no one could have predicted just how significant those boots would become. They did not contain blood. There were no visible fibers or immediate links to a crime scene, and yet investigators trusted their instincts. In cases like this, seemingly mundane objects often hold the truth long after memories fade and stories change. For more than a year, the disappearance of Mengqi Ji remained one of the most haunting unsolved cases in Columbia, Missouri. Despite mounting suspicion surrounding Joseph Elledge, investigators lacked the one piece of evidence that could fully confirm their fears: Mengqi's body. Without it, key questions about what had happened to her, where she had been taken, and how she died remained unanswered. Then, in March 2021, an unexpected discovery in a wooded park would change everything, and it would come from a source no one could have predicted: a juniper tree. On a quiet day in Rockbridge Memorial State Park, a local hiker named Stephen Roberts wandered off the established trails. The park, known for its dense woods and rugged terrain, is a place where fallen branches, rocks, and leaves blend together in thick undergrowth. As Roberts walked, something unnatural caught his eye: a shiny object partially concealed beneath leaves and dirt. Curious, he moved closer and realized it was a purse. Its presence in such a remote area immediately struck him as strange. Looking beneath the purse, Roberts made a discovery that no one should ever have to encounter. Hidden under the brush were skeletal human remains. He immediately contacted authorities, triggering a swift response from law enforcement and forensic teams. The area was secured, and investigators carefully began the process of recovering what was left of the body. Through dental records and forensic analysis, the remains were later positively identified as those of 28-year-old Mengqi Ji. The confirmation was devastating for her family, who had spent more than a year clinging to hope, but it also brought long-awaited answers. Mengqi had not disappeared voluntarily. She had been killed and concealed in the woods, less than a half-hour drive from her home. While the discovery of her remains was emotionally overwhelming, the most crucial development came not from the bones themselves, but from evidence that had been quietly preserved months earlier. Investigators revisited the muddy boots seized from Joseph Elledge's home during the early stages of the case. At the time they were collected, the boots had raised suspicion but yielded no obvious forensic value. Now, with the burial site known, they became a focal point. In a groundbreaking collaboration, investigators turned to scientists at the Missouri Botanical Garden. Using advanced techniques in plant DNA analysis, researchers examined tiny juniper needles embedded in the soles of Elledge's boots. These fragments were microscopic, invisible to the naked eye, but they carried a unique biological signature, one that could potentially tie a person to a specific location. Scientists then collected samples from juniper trees in the area surrounding Mengqi's burial site. Juniper DNA, like human DNA, varies slightly from tree to tree and grove to grove. When the samples from the boots were compared to those from the park, the results were striking. They matched. The juniper needles on Elledge's boots came from the same grove where Mengqi Ji had been buried. Based on the steadily growing body of evidence, Joseph Elledge was formally indicted on first-degree murder charges in February 2020, a decision that stunned many observers because it came more than a year before Mengqi Ji's body was ever found. Prosecutors made it clear that they were not waiting for remains to surface in order to pursue justice. In their view, the circumstantial and behavioral evidence was already strong enough to show that Mengqi had not disappeared voluntarily. She had been killed. From the outset, prosecutors argued that Mengqi Ji's death was the result of a violent confrontation inside the home she shared with Elledge. They maintained that what followed was not panic or confusion, but a deliberate and calculated effort to cover up a crime. The family and misled Mengqi's loved ones in China, allowing them to believe she might still be alive. Each of these actions, prosecutors said, demonstrated consciousness of guilt. Central to the state's argument was Elledge's behavior after Mengqi's death. Prosecutors emphasized that he did not call emergency services, did not ask for help, and did not show urgency or fear consistent with an accidental injury. Instead, they argued, Elledge made a series of decisions that required time, planning, and intent, transporting Mengqi's body, burying it in a remote location, and then reporting her as missing days later. In the prosecution's view, these were not the actions of a grieving husband, but of someone trying to erase evidence. When the case finally went to trial, one of the most powerful components of the prosecution's presentation came not from physical evidence alone, but from the couple's own words. Boone County Prosecuting Attorney Dan Knight revealed that investigators had recovered hours of audio recordings and written journal entries created by Joseph Elledge and Mengqi Ji during their. In some clips, Elledge belittled Mengqi's intelligence and independence. In others, his tone shifted from condescension to anger, with statements that prosecutors argued crossed into intimidation. According to the state, this pattern established motive, showing how emotional abuse and control can escalate into physical violence. Prosecutors argued that the recordings contradicted Elledge's claims that the marriage was largely stable and that the fatal argument was an unfortunate anomaly. Instead, they said, the evidence showed a relationship defined by imbalance, resentment, and simmering rage. The jury was urged to view Mengqi's death not as a random accident, but as the tragic culmination of months of escalating conflict. After a lengthy trial and nearly 7 hours of deliberation, the jury reached a verdict in November 2021. Joseph Elledge was found guilty of second-degree murder, meaning the jury concluded that he killed Mengqi, but did not find sufficient evidence for premeditated first-degree murder. He was also convicted on charges related to child abuse and endangerment stemming from the injuries to their daughter. At sentencing, the judge imposed the maximum recommended sentence of 28 years in prison for this verdict, and that the appeal lacked merit. Memory Zuziwai. To this day, the case of Mengqi Ji remains one of the most disturbing domestic homicide cases in recent Missouri history. Mengqi's family, torn apart by grief and confusion, eventually found closure once her body was discovered and the truth came to light. Her parents traveled from China to participate in the trial and have spoken about her compassion, intelligence, and dreams left unfulfilled. Her daughter, the toddler who survived her mother's death, became the central reason why authorities refused to accept that Mengqi left voluntarily. No mother with a loving bond would abandon her child under those circumstances. Investigators continue to highlight how detective intuition,